Wajahat Ali, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Jake. I appreciate you having me.
I'd love to ask you about Islam. And
Yay.
I guess let me preface this with something. So there's a lot of Islamophobia in the United States and around the world. And I don't know how to say this, but I think one of the things people are thinking or feeling is that there are terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah whose ideologies they believe are centered around a fundamentalist aspect of Islam, which people feel, or in some cases, which these terrorist groups say is defining and is propagating their hatred, their desire to kill people. So, what do you make of people's fear around violent groups that are claiming to use Islam as a propagating force?
Yeah, I mean, I share their fears because these violent extremists who have taken the mantle of religiosity as a means of rationalizing what is their criminal actions and perverse ideology of supremacy, they threaten all of us, right? It's not just like, Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS. It's not like, they're only going to come after the non-Muslims. No, they kill Muslims also. So it's one of those situations in particular where it's a threat to everyone. And for the majority of Muslims, you have to realize Islam is not a new thing. It's been around for 1,400 years. There are about 1.7 billion Muslims around the world. Unfortunately, though, in America and a few other places, especially when it comes to certain political ideologies and political movements, they deliberately help these extremist groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, Al-Qaeda by giving them the legitimacies they so desperately crave. What they say, see, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hamas, that is the true face of Islam. And what they do is they ignore not just the rich history of Islam, the diverse history of Islam, right? 1,400 years, 1.7 billion people, right? But they also don't listen to the rest of us, like the overwhelming majority that repeatedly, since 9/11, that's been what, Jake, 23 years now? Overwhelmingly, imam after imam after imam, group after group, community after community. Yes, we reject terrorism. We condemn terrorism, right? It doesn't matter. What happens instead is they take this minority, and it is a minority with a minority following, a violent extremist group, and they hold it as the true face of Islam.
When you say they, you're talking about, when you say they hold them,
I'm talking about not just the right wing, but I'll give you an example. Is that in the after 9/11, and you're younger than me, but after 9/11, for almost 10 years, there was a meme that you could look up called Islamic Rage Boy. An Islamic Rage Boy was a meme and kind of a term in corporate establishment U.S. media given to this image of this thing called Islam. And the image of Islam was a brown, bearded, angry man who was anti-Semitic, anti-deodorant, anti-KFC, right? So it kind of became like Islamic Rage became the story, the single story of 1.7 billion people and 1,400 years of Islamic civilization and of American Muslims, who are the most diverse religious communities in America, right? So it's almost like saying this. Suppose if you identify as white or white Christian, and instead of, Jesus, or say instead of Mother Teresa, I'm trying to think of like, positive Christian influence, Martin Luther King, repeatedly and consistently for 20 plus years in America, the face, the image, the narrative, the story of Christianity, 2 billion adherents of Christianity, been around for 2,000 years, was instead, I don't know, give me a white Christian nationalist, like let's say, Nick Fuentes, who, by the way, dined with Donald Trump. And suppose repeatedly everyone said, man, these Christians, look, Nick Fuentes and Franklin Graham and Donald Trump and Proud Boys, these guys are freaks. Look at these people. You call that Christianity? And suppose the 2 billion Christians are like, whoa, we got problems in our community, but that isn't the only story. Or let me give you another example. Jews, 16 million Jews. Judaism, or to be Jewish, it's not just to be part of a religion. It's also being part of a group, ethnicity. They're secular Jews, right? They're Jews who do not believe in God, but they claim Judaism, or they say, I'm Jewish. Suppose Ben Gavir and Smotrich and the settlers who are violent in the West Bank were the story in the narrative of Judaism. How would that make you feel, Jake?
Not great.
That's what I'm talking about. And so what we've seen with Islam, especially after 9/11, I take it to 9/11 because even though it goes before 9/11, Jake, 9/11 was a fork in the road where it became us versus them. And it was the West versus Islam. This was the type of framing, the Samuel Huntington Clash of Civilizations. And the entire time, I kept asking myself, as an American, born and raised in America, who happens to be Muslim, who is the West and who is Islam? The West became known as the United States and anyone who supported the United States, right? You might forget that at a time, Donald Rumsfeld said he shit on Germany and France because Germany and France initially didn't support the war on terror. And you might be too young to remember that America canceled French fries, I'm not making this up, and called French fries freedom fries. So the West was not Europe, it was America and whoever supported America versus Islam. And Islam, unfortunately, became code word for Al-Qaeda, Saddam, ISIS. Meanwhile, the rest of us are like, yo, we're the West and Islam. That doesn't represent either of us. And, you fast forward to 2024 now, how it's all connected. This week, Jake, as of this recording, Donald Trump said that Haitians have to go back, even though they're legally here. He attacked Jews and said, blame Jews if you were to lose. And in the past week, we've seen these attacks on Rashida Tlaib, regardless of what you think about her. I don't know if you saw that horrific online cartoon that appeared in National Review that showed her to be part of, they had a cartoon of Rashida Tlaib on her desk. She put her pager on the desk. The pager exploded. Get it? She's Hezbollah. And then we also saw last week Senator Kennedy of Foghorn Leghorn, Oxford educated elitist who talks like he's like a yokel, attack Maya Berry, the Muslim Arab American head of a group, on a meeting, in a congressional meeting to stem the tide of violence against Jews and Muslims. He accused her of being Hezbollah and Hamas, asked her without any evidence to condemn him. After she condemned him for 2 minutes, still called her an extremist and ended the conversation by saying you should put your head in a bag. That is 2024, Jake. It's all connected. That's what I want your listeners to know. This hate is all connected. They're coming after Muslims, Jews, Black people, immigrants, people of color. Don't allow yourself to be divided by these hate mongers. I gave you a rant. You asked me a simple question, but I hope I connected the dots for folks.
You did, and I appreciate that. So I want to double click into Islam for a moment. The other day I spoke to Mossab Hassan, who is the son of one of the co-founders of Hamas. And
Son of Hamas.
Yeah. And his perspective is that from his education of Islam, he believes, and others, this is not related to Mossab, but like someone like Sam Harris, thinks that Islam is inherently violent. Like the teachings of the Quran say things in writing explicitly that call for whether I don't really know, but something along the lines of calling the death for a certain people or for violence, right? So Mossab, or perhaps Sam Harris's argument would say that Islam is inherently violent because the Quran is inherently violent because the Quran in writing calls for either death or violence. And then so my counter argument when I spoke to Mossab is I said, well, listen, dude, all religious texts have crazy things in them, right? But most of the millions of people that follow one of these world religions don't adhere to the literal, the violence stated in these texts. And so I said that, and Mossab pushed back and said, no, I'm going to paraphrase how I understood it, was basically, no, the Quran, he said, is qualitatively different in how it's calling for violence. So what do you make of that?
Just replace whatever Mossab says about Muslims with any group. Black people would call him a white supremacist. Jews, they'd call him they literally just replace Muslim with Jew, replace Muslim with Christian, replace Muslim with Black, when all these people say what they say. And if you were to read back their exact quotes, you would be horrified and say, oh my God, this person is a what? Anti-Semite, bigot, white supremacist. because it's Muslim or Arab, and because I give you a little bit of short history of how Islamophobia has been mainstreamed and normalized, we kind of shrug and say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And because the story of Islam and Muslims oftentimes hasn't been told by Muslims, but oftentimes has been told by people like Sam Harris or Bill Maher or corporate media that oftentimes exists in this, post-war on terror climate where we've given a both sides pass to Donald Trump, who said, I think Islam hates us. Remember that? He said that 9 years ago. I think Islam hates us. What's Islam, by the way? He made a conspiracy theory and a lie about Muslims celebrating 9/11. He said he saw it on TV. He still hasn't produced the tape. Did the conspiracy against Haitian immigrants. It's a lie, completely debunked. Promoted the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, right? So these are how these conspiracy theories, especially against marginalized groups, get mainstreamed. And if you don't push back, Jake, they become normalized. And in the absence of people knowing the vast reality and history of 1.7 billion people, folks, right? It's like Islam is not a new thing. It has been around for a while. It is all around the world. There are Muslims in Europe. There are Muslims in America. The first Muslim that came to America was most likely a slave. In fact, they say anywhere from 5 to 30% of the slave trade that was brought here against its will was Muslim. So if you think about it, Black Muslims are part and parcel of America's soil. We helped, in part, build this country, right? You have Muslims in Spain, you have Muslims in Germany, you got Muslims in South Africa. And so you sit there and you think, wait a second, I have Muslim friends, I have Muslim colleagues. I trust a Muslim with my life if I'm in a big city, because I know it's a stereotype, but my people are pretty dominant in the transportation industry, Jake. Uber, taxis, cabs, right? You literally depend on us to feed you halal meat. We could kill you if we wanted to every day by poisoning the halal meat, by driving the taxi cabs off the road, right? I'm using these exaggerated real life examples to let people just sit there for a second and think about this, right? Like, oh yeah, that doesn't make any sense. And if we were to say this about any other group, and by the way, this is nothing new. I did a study called Fear Inc., The Roots of the Islamophobia Network in America. And we took these talking points and these memes that oftentimes Sam Harris and, son of Hamas and other people say about Islam and Muslims, right? They're a fifth column. They're a threat, inherently violent. They can't be trusted. Unique, dangerous threat, right? Sources of radicalization, vermin, criminals, invasion, right? You replace Muslim with Jew or Catholic in the United States of America, Jake. Not even in the 19th century. In the early part of the 20th century, this is how Americans used to talk about Eastern European Jews and Catholics. It is simply a reboot and a remake. And so I would hope that your listeners who are open-minded at the very least would sit there and go, oh yeah, we've seen this story before. It's just that in this current modern time, Jake, because of modern global politics, we see a Hamas or a Hezbollah or an ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and we forget the 1,400 years of Islam and the 1.7 billion Muslims. And I go back to the point I made in the beginning. The number one domestic terror threat in America, Jake, for several years running, you know what it is?
I don't.
White supremacist terrorism.
Well,
has been the number one domestic terror threat. The number one warning that law enforcement has given is the rise and violence of white domestic terrorism. Jake, how come we don't talk about it?
We should. Can I wait? Sorry. Can I push back on, not push back, but kind of double click into something? So, I hear and agree with everything you've said, right? Like, I have Muslim friends, and I understand that Muslims are peaceful. Like, I am personally not Islamophobic, and I understand.
Well, some Muslims are peaceful. Some Muslims drink. Some Muslims are religious. Some Muslims are family people. Some Muslims are hypocrites. They're just people.
The gestalt of what you're saying is that we shouldn't. Yeah, like we shouldn't be racist towards Muslims because, as we all know, day to day, they're just people. Now, but let me come back to my question, which is, help me be better at dismantling arguments put forth by Sam Harris and people like that. So what they would say is that the Quran is different from the Old Testament or from the New Testament in the way that it is calling for violence. And they're saying, I think what Sam Harris or someone would say, I would imagine, is that even if it's statistically true that most Muslims are peaceful, like Sam Harris takes issue with the text, and he says, this text is inherently bad because it calls for bad things. And so let's not you and I debate whether Muslims are mostly peaceful. I agree, like they're good people, you know. Let's make this conversation about the text itself. So, what do you say to someone who says that, who's not even making a judgment about Muslims, but is just saying that they have a problem with the Quran because of what it says? What do you help me? Help me
Yeah.
dismantle that. Help me dismantle
Well,
that argument.
you don't have to well, I'll say two things. First and foremost, Islam doesn't speak, Muslims do. A
Yeah.
text that can inspire an Osama bin Laden also inspires a Rumi, who's one of the best-selling poets in America, who heals
Mhm.
hearts and helps a lot of people get dates. Right? A text like the Bible that is inspiring white Christian nationalism in the United States of America and violent insurrections also inspires a Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King. It also inspires a nurses and a nun I met, Sister Pimentel, who literally works at the border to help refugees. And she says she does this because these immigrants are dehumanized, and she believes, as a follower of Jesus and Christ, that she has to serve the needy, right?
Mhm.
A text such as the Torah or the Talmudic interpretations inspires Jews to realize that they have been marginalized and to align with other marginalized groups to advance civil rights for LGBTQ, for women, for Muslims. They show up at the airports when Donald Trump said, "Oh, we're going to have a Muslim ban," and they're right there with Muslims saying, "Nope, you all are welcome." And then at the same time, you are seeing right now in Israel the mainstreaming of the most extreme religious fanatics, right? Jewish supremacists who believe, "Nope, the land belongs to us, and we're the chosen people," and they are saying that their religion has given them license to get rid of the enemy, and the enemy is all Palestinians. They're Amalek. It doesn't matter if they're kids, doesn't matter animals, doesn't matter women. God has given them permission to use any violent means necessary. You see that in Hinduism. You have a Gandhi, and then you have a Narendra Modi, and the rise of Hindu fascism, as we are literally, sitting here talking about it. We don't talk about it enough, but the rise of Hindu nationalism, which is killing now, wait for it, Jake, Muslims in India. So Muslims are the ones who are the victims of Hindu nationalism, and also, by the way, Christians, and it's going to be other religious groups. So the text doesn't speak, the people do, number one. Number two, as you mentioned, any religious book, you could literally open any of them. I've studied them, you studied them. You could pick and choose, Jake, if we're to be honest. And you can find intellectual ammunition to rationalize violence and patriarchy and misogyny and homophobia. Let's be very honest about that. And then number three, I would say, is, Toni Morrison, the late great Toni Morrison, and I'm going to paraphrase her, said the ultimate goal of racism is distraction. And what I mean by that is it's never enough, right? Prove that you're safe and moderate. So black people have to prove that they're safe and moderate. Now there's a new hurdle. Prove that you're civilized. So you spend your whole life proving that you're civilized. Prove that you've written poetry. You spend your whole life writing poetry. Prove that you are as intellectually capable as the Westerners. Then you spend your whole life proving it. It's never enough. Bigots do not care. They flatten and they bludgeon. What they want is to advance their argument, and they ignore the vast, rich universe that is in front of them that provides daily evidence that contradicts their thesis, right? So what I would say, Jake, and I've been in this game for a long time, don't waste your time, bro. like say,
Well,
Sam Harris, you believe what you believe. Thank you very much. Okay, I've talked to Wajahat. I know Muslims. I've traveled. I've seen the world. It's sad that you think this way, but onto you, your way, onto me, mine. You can't change them. And this is coming from a man who spent 20 years in the game, right? And I'll tell you, no matter what I've done, it's never enough. There's always a new test. And after a while, you realize, okay, I can't win you over. I won't win you over. I will win over the majority instead. And the majority, especially the youth, more and more as they get more exposed to narratives and stories and people, they're like, yeah, this doesn't ring true. What the son of Hamas is saying about Muslims, I got Muslim friends and they fast during Ramadan, and that dude's not violent. That dude has kittens and feeds me. So it's one of those things, Jake, where I appreciate your sincere attempt. I really do. But speaking as an old head with gray hairs now and who has spent 20 plus years, I've realized, especially with folks like Sam Harris, we met once I think at TED, when I was giving a talk. I think he was invited a couple years ago. Some of these folks, Jay, don't waste your time. Just be like, okay, just say yes, okay, and move on.
Yeah, okay, I could. I would hope that someone who is intelligent and I think good faith, I like Sam Harris. I think, I don't know, would be able to be convinced through reason.
It's like, okay, look at the political climate right now. I'll give you an example. It just popped in my head. Women can't be leaders. Women can't be president. Or even in the realm of comedy, women can't be funny. Now, do you want women to spend their whole life proving that? And they oftentimes do, right? They contort themselves. They try not to be too bossy. They try not to be too feminine. They try not to be too soft. They try not to be too masculine. They try not to be too attractive, but they don't try to be too dour, right? And they contort themselves in these pretzels to Cirque du Soleil gymnastic their way to the top. Or then you could just do it. And then, if Kamala wins, which I think she will, and regardless of, whether you like her or don't like her, at the very least, we can all admit a glass ceiling will break. And then people will say, oh, yeah, women can lead, whether they're good leaders, bad leaders, men are good leaders and bad leaders, right? Sometimes you just have to move forward, right?
Yeah.
Black people have dealt with this all throughout America. Jews have dealt with this in America. Muslims, unfortunately, ever since 9/11, are dealing with the same exact, it's literally, Jake, and I'm using the word literally as it's meant to be used. It is the same exact talking points and tropes that Jews and Catholics had to deal with. Catholics in the 19th century, Jews in the early part of the 20th century.
A couple thoughts there. One is that I think I hear you that some people can't be reasoned with, right? Like I would never argue with Nick Fuentes because there's no hope, right? But if for example, if anti-Semitism, like sometimes people have hatred and racism because they're ignorant, and if you can show them how they're wrong, some people who are curious enough in good faith might be convinced.
I don't disagree with you. This is where I'm at in this stage of my life, and I'm glad you're well intentioned, because I like you. As a Muslim, here we go. Let's go all in. As a Muslim, I believe God is forgiving and merciful even when people aren't. And as a Muslim, I believe that even if you have your last breath, into your last breath, you can have contrition. You can have an epiphany, right? And I've seen in my life, in the 43 years that I've lived, that people change. Everyone says people won't change. I disagree. Like, if you really believe people won't change, there's no hope, man. There's no path to redemption, right? Like, you might as well just say born to lose and have that tattoo on your forehead. So I believe that. At the same time, in my 43 years, I believe sometimes no matter how much you lead a camel to water, some camels just go towards the ship.
Some camels.
Right?
Some camels.
Yeah. And so you sit there and I go, okay. And I've thought about this a lot. I have limited time. I have limited energy. I'm 43 years old. I'm a middle-aged man. I have less years ahead of me than behind me. I've spent a lot of my life.
You think 85 is the max for you?
I'm South Asian, man. We got the fixins for all things bad. We don't have the Ashkenazi genes. You guys live till like you're 95. Desi is like, and plus our diet. Like, if I get to 65, it's a win. But I sit there and I think about this. I really do. Okay, I say, okay, how can I simultaneously not waste my time, that time I don't have, but at the same time have faith in people? And this is the analogy I've come up with. The caravan has to move forward. If the caravan in the United States of America, and I look at all the data for the past 9 years, it seems like no matter what I do, no matter what you do, 30% of America, Jake, lives on like Earth 3. You just can't crack that because of, in part, politics, media, their own ecosystems. Just 30%. If you look at all the numbers, they believe all the conspiracy theories, the most nutty shit. That means we have 70%. Let me then work on the 70% and move the caravan forward. However, you might be asking yourself, what about the 30% watch? And what I say is the following. I cannot wait for those 30%. I have to move the caravan forward. We have to keep going forward. We can't go back, but the door will always be open and my hand will always be extended. And there comes a point, Jake, where there's reciprocity. That person has to join us, right? But my door will always be open. That's the way I've reconciled it.
So generally speaking, yeah, you agree that some people, it's not worth expending the energy time to try to convince them they're set in their hateful ways. But some people who are maybe curious or good faith or just ignorant, if they can, some people who might not have met a Muslim would meet you and say, wow, I've never really spoken to a Muslim person, and you guys aren't so bad, right? And it's through exposure that we diffuse hatred and understand. Like I definitely grew up with certain biases, and then it was through meeting people that I didn't know anything about that I realized that we're all just people. But it was through meeting them that I got to understand that.
So there's two things to this. Yes, and let me tell you the negative side of this. Oh, Jake, he's the good Jew. I wish all the other Jews could be like him. Waj, he's the good Muslim. You're the good one. You're the moderate one. I've seen that happen as well. You become the token one. And through exposure, yeah, you have a personal relationship, but it doesn't really change that person. What we've seen oftentimes is some people have to be dragged forward. I'll give you an example. Women could have met so many people and exposed themselves to so many people, and yet society said you don't deserve the right to vote until it finally happened. Hems and haws and controversy, but they passed the 19th Amendment. Women have the right to vote. It becomes enshrined within the laws. You can't take away that freedom, and people were forced to evolve. Same thing with the end of segregation, the end of slavery. People were forced to evolve. Same thing with marriage equality. So there comes a point you have to do both, Jake. I don't think it's either or. And also, I want to say to folks, there's a luxury to folks, and I think you'll agree with me on this. I travel, if you go to some multiracial, multi-faith places like New York, for example, California. I'm originally from the Bay. We're lucky. We're exposed. Other places in America aren't like that. So maybe in New York, you have the privilege of just saying, bro, I don't have time for this. Like, if you really believe this, then you're going to have a miserable life in New York where most of the cab drivers are people of color, and you're most likely going to eat like 6 of your meals per week by a person of color and a Muslim, right? But I've talked to folks in, say, Louisiana. I've talked to like that one Pakistani Muslim kid or that one Ethiopian kid, and they're like, dude, I'm the only one. Like I don't have the privilege of ignoring these people. Like, these people are my neighbors. And so I have to go above and beyond sometimes. And even though it's exhausting, I have to be the walking Wikipedia entry on Muslims or Haiti or fill in the blank. And so for those people, I say, I understand. I've been in your situation before. Do the best that you can. You have to exercise more patience. You have to be welcoming even though you're not welcomed. It sucks. But the reason why you might have to put in that work is maybe, like you said, you can win over those people. And maybe you can win over, at the very least, their kids, so that your kids and their kids can have a better future, right? And so that's why, as you can see, I try to take a nuanced approach, because it depends on the circumstance. It depends on the person. Also, I'll say this, Jake, not everyone has the temperament. Like I know some people who are just tired. They're like, it's 2024. I don't have time for this shit. Like, if you live in the 19th century, if you don't believe women can be president, sucks to be you. Peace out.
Yeah.
And then there's other people like, if you just have one conversation with them, you can win them.
Yeah. So it depends on the circumstance. It depends where you are. That makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to regurgitate some of the sentiment I've heard for some people and why they're fearful of Muslims. And the reason I want to bring this up is purely to dispel these sentiments, right? I think you made a lot of good points. Like, it's not a good justification to say that, oh, the Quran contains violent passages, because so do all the religious texts. It's not a good argument to say that there are some extremist or violent Muslims in this world, because there are also terrible people of every religion throughout time. It's evident. And maybe that's where the conversation ends. I think that kind of summarizes it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Continue, please.
So some people will say, well, there's so much terrorism going on, and for the sake of argument, I hope we can just agree that Hezbollah and Hamas are terrorist groups. So they're recognized, but we can, the conflict is very nuanced and complicated. We can talk about that, but there are a lot of terrorist groups currently that have an affiliation with Islam, and probably not as many terrorist groups that are like Christian oriented. But what you said earlier is, like, the number one cause of domestic, I think, terrorism is white supremacists. But I think people look and they say, okay, Hezbollah, ISIS, Hamas, Al Qaeda, and they see all these groups, and we're talking about thousands of people, and they say, oh, they're all driven by fundamentalist Islam, and that's when people are drawing this correlation, and they're saying, well, all of these like thousands of people. I hate to make this argument because I want to be careful with my words. Like I don't mean to be Islamophobic, but I do think it's important to kind of state the sentiment that some people feel.
Yeah, thousands of people out of 1.7 billion also divorced from the very real geopolitical realities that no one talks about as to how these groups formed, why they formed, why there's recruitment, right? And you can simultaneously criticize and condemn these groups while at the same time filling in the dots and connect the stories. Why is there a vacuum being filled by these violent ideologies and extremists who are recruiting people who are the victims of bombing campaigns or occupation, right? Similarly, KKK, people forget that's a terrorist group. You know what they used to burn? Crosses. Violent insurrection. January 6th. You know what was a major motivator of that violent insurrection? White Christian nationalism. Not my words, based upon a report released by the Baptist Joint Committee, where white Christians in America are condemning white Christian nationalism. And I empathize with them because I feel like a Muslim. Oh, look, we're in the same boat now, right? They're like, whoa, these people don't represent us, right? We're looking at white Christian nationalism rising, going mainstream. We're seeing white supremacy and white supremacist terrorism as the number one domestic terror threat, often aligned with, not exclusively aligned with, this idea of a Western Christian civilization. That's what Nick Fuentes wants, right? He wants to get rid of the Jews, black people, Muslims, tell them all to go away because America is a white Christian country. It's part and parcel, the ideological backbone of this white supremacy. However, we don't talk about it. We don't name it. We don't connect the dots. We don't talk to the preachers. We don't sit there and label and blame all white people or Christians because we have a more sophisticated, nuanced understanding that, yes, this does not represent most of them. It is a problem, though, right? Similarly, this is a problem. A violent Muslim extremism, Jewish supremacy, Hindu supremacy is a problem, but it does not represent all of them or the vast history in the absence of you knowing the history, in the absence of you knowing Muslims, in the absence of you knowing Islam, in the absence of our stories being invisible, erased, stereotyped, in the absence of any, forget positive stories about Islam or Muslims, just regular stories, right? I don't really care about positive stories. Just show me the Muslim eating Cheetos, watching Squid Games on Netflix. That's your average Muslim, okay? Like, show me the Muslim trying to like mac on a girl on a Saturday night with his homies, all right, as an 18-year-old. That's most Muslims, right? And people will then go, oh, okay, I get it. And that's why I think this young generation, Jake, is more inoculated from the stereotypes, the conspiracy theories, the talking points of the son of Hamas. Like, this stuff doesn't stick because they're like, no, I know Muslims. This is stupid shit. Same thing with like LGBTQ. I'm old enough where, in the 80s and 90s, the gay was like boogeyman, queer men, they're like predators. But if you try this stuff out with young people, sure, some people will say that, but most people are like, nah, man, I got like teachers and family members and friends, and I've read books and heard stories. That's bullshit. So it's one of those situations where some of these people who are entrenched in the post 9/11 narrative of Muslims as a unique security threat, I believe, even though it's still very rampant, even though it's, unfortunately, we've seen it fuel violence, we've seen it part and parcel of this attack on minorities and Jews and black people. It's all connected, folks. We're all seen as the invaders. Black people, Muslims, Jews, LGBTQ women. We're all seen as the threat. You're seeing this metastasize within one political party and one political group. I'm sorry, but that's the facts. Right-wing parties in Europe and America. But the majority is expanding the tent, Jake, which includes Jews, Muslims, Arabs, and realizes, yeah, there's problems, but this ain't it. And also they realize, and this is important, you're seeing the rise of nuns, not nuns as in sisters, Nones. A lot of those atheists and agnostics and people who like hate religion or organized religion, whether it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and see that as a source of like misogyny, homophobia, patriarchy, they were there at the airports welcoming Muslim refugees because they were able to differentiate between religion, what they don't like about religion, religious extremists, versus people. And they realized we should not demonize people for the sins of the few.
Yeah.
And I hope I was able to articulate that, and I appreciate you airing it out.
I think the message for me in a nutshell is every religion can be used for harm, and every religion is used for bad and for harm. In
Every
the
ideology, I will not even just say religion, because religion is a powerful ideology, language, and force, but religion and ideologies, political ideologies, can and have been and will be, unfortunately, Jake, used and abused by individuals who are usually seeking the same thing: power, wealth, money, women, control. Right? If you look at violent extremists, whether it's ISIS, a KKK member, IRA gang members, oftentimes these groups, if you really look at it, the DNA of these groups is very similar. If you look at counterterrorism experts, right? It's a group of individuals who have a very simplistic us versus them binary narrative of the world. They think they are heroes. They think they're the good guys. They have to save their group from an invading force, and they have rationalized the use of violence to save their community. They also believe in patriarchy, and they believe men are being emasculated. They believe men should be on top. They believe women should have the role as the mother. They are anti-feminism, anti-LGBTQ, and they believe once they get control and power and they rid or purify their lands of this invading force, then they shall redeem the land and then relive this romantic vision of the past they have in their head. Does that sound familiar?
Yes. And I appreciate you connecting the dots between religion and ideology. It's not just religion, it's different ideologies can be taken too far. So let me use that as a segue to talk about DEI, whether it's good or bad. And I'll kind of set the stage for this. So in this country, there's racism, like you've mentioned, and there's sexism, and there's minority groups are not treated fairly. And so I think I believe, and a lot of people believe, that we should take certain steps to amend that. The argument against DEI that I've heard is that while its purported intentions might be good, the actual actions and consequences of DEI is that you are creating racism because you are explicitly favoring some groups of people over others, and you're removing meritocracy. So, what do you think about DEI?
Yeah, so DEI at the end of the day is diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And at the end of the day, it's about giving people equal opportunities, especially those people who do not have equal opportunities. It's not about favoring one group or the other, but it's about giving individuals who didn't have a boot or bootstraps because they had a boot on their neck a chance. See, those people who make the claim about meritocracy oftentimes are ignorant and blind to racism and white supremacy as an operating system of America. And what do I mean by that? In America, since the inception of this thing called America, the classification of race only happened in the 18th century, white and black. It didn't exist before then. And white was designated for white landowners, those who were usually wealthier, light-skinned, and to demarcate them from the lower class, which was black people, indigenous. And at that time, even those who weren't considered white, Irish weren't considered white, Italians weren't considered white, right? So when it comes to meritocracy, it would have been great. I would believe in meritocracy if indeed there was equal merit and equal reward for merit. Women didn't have the right to vote. Women in 2024 still get paid less for the same amount of work. People of color, by virtue of simply their skin color, don't get as many interviews, don't get callbacks, don't get loans. You know, you've seen those stories that are coming out, that are more and more viral, where once the couple that made a bid on a house was found to be black, the bid was removed, right? Like you've seen law enforcement come and like take out people who are literally trying to enter their own home because they're black. That just gives you a taste of how America has not been equal and is still not equal for the rest of us. Those of us with the wrong complexion, those of us with ovaries, those of us with the wrong last name. And so DEI measures as a goal is to just make the playing field equal. If you truly believe in meritocracy, we do too. Just give us a shot. Give us not a special shot, an equal shot. And so DEI measures are put in place to remedy this obscene 300 plus year history of the playing field being completely rigged for often those who are straight men, and often not always those who are white or can appear white. And so the small measures of DEI that have been implemented, what people don't realize, and it's a flip side of both coins. Let me put it this way. If you are willing to attack Muslims, right? Well, look what just happened the past week. It was first Haitians, which has led to terror threats, which has hijacked Springfield, Ohio, including non-Haitians. City Hall had to be canceled. Schools have to be canceled, right? So in this zeal to root out quote unquote evil Haitian immigrants, which is all bullshit, the entire town is under siege. Then it moved on to Jews, where Donald Trump blamed the Jews if he were to lose. Now there's a target on Jews. And then this week, the target is on Muslims. It makes all of us what? Unsafe. Increases stochastic terrorism, divide and conquer. Now, flip side. Everyone blames black folks. And what we've seen in the data is if you tell Americans, especially white Americans, that there's a policy that will help black people, they will be more opposed to it. But when you look at civil rights movement, for example, and black people simply fighting and marching for DEI, Martin Luther King was all about the DEI, folks. What happened as a result of the civil rights movement? There was something, Jake, that got passed called the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act. I would not be here sitting in America as a U.S. citizen, born and raised in the Bay Area, talking to you without the Immigration Nationality Act. On the heels of the civil rights movement, this other DEI initiative came through, and this DEI initiative called the INA, 1965 Immigration Nationality Act, removed the 40-year quota that was placed on immigrants, which limited immigrants from coming from all of Asia, and it was placed in the early 20s. It wanted to limit Eastern European Jews and Italians because in the 1920s, the invaders weren't Mexicans and Muslims. They were Jews, Italians, and also Asians. So as a result of these DEI measures, we have freedom. We have more Americans that come here, that it's a more diverse country, and we have been able to achieve little by little the American dream. And so these DEI measures, Jake, what people don't realize, end up helping everyone. Child tax credit ends up helping everyone, right? Look what happened. They took away affirmative action, right? Did you see the latest studies? Who'd it hurt? All people of color. Black enrollment went down. Asian enrollment went down, right? And affirmative action, by the way, a little fact that people don't like mentioning is that overwhelmingly it helped white women. So these measures are actually in turn used to help people, the most marginalized people.
How did it help white women? Sorry.
Because the affirmative action policy, if you look at the greatest beneficiaries, because people only look at it through terms of education, but if you look at the greatest beneficiary of affirmative action policies, it's actually been white women, which is amazing. And then also, if you look at Asian Americans,
is it looking at income or what makes them benefit?
Income, employment. They've been one of the boons for it, but oftentimes you put the boogeyman of black, the welfare queen, right? And so it becomes easier based on what I was saying. When you tell Americans, oh, black people are benefiting, they're like, welfare queen, blah, blah, these tropes. And then they put the Asian face on it as the plaintiff, right? And you saw the divide and conquer technique. Look, affirmative action, it hurts Asians. It's based on meritocracy. They put an Asian plaintiff, Asian versus black, and they took away affirmative action. And who did it hurt? Black people and Asians. And so DEI policies, not every policy has succeeded. You have to be intentional about it. Yeah, what's about the end goal? But DEI now, let's be honest, Jake, and we should be honest, has been weaponized very deliberately as a boogeyman by the right wing, by Christopher Rufo, a right-wing culture warrior who has openly admitted that he has weaponized the term CRT and DEI as a boogeyman to advance right-wing politics. His words, not mine, openly admitted it. Just came out, folks, last week that Christopher Rufo, anti-DEI, Christian conservative warrior, is married to a formerly undocumented woman. His wife is a formerly undocumented woman. And oh, by the way, his email was also on Ashley Madison. And DEI has been used as a boogeyman to kill African-American history. AP classes in Florida. It was used to try to kill it in Georgia, but because there's an election right now, the Republicans took it away. It has been used to attack LGBTQ folks. A horrific number of laws have been passed to restrict freedom of Americans, attack drag queens, attack women, ban books. They also used to ban books in Nazi Germany. And so the attack on DEI has actually hurt American freedom and liberties and actually destroys this whole concept of America as being a pluralistic society. But thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Is there systemic racism? Like, how do we think of systemic racism in this country? What does it mean?
Yes. To answer your first question, systemic racism means that white supremacy is an ideology, an operating system that believes that white men or white Christian men should be at the top, and the systems that are designed and put in place are to ensure that white men are on top and given favor. Now, there is implicit bias. There is bias that happens almost, without you realizing it. So my wife's a doctor, and in medicine, for example, because a lot of the doctors are white, a lot of the nurses are white, because they don't have, like you said, exposure to black and brown colleagues, because the exposure that they often had is one of stereotypes, because the narrative oftentimes of black and brown people is what? One of criminality, one of, not being mentally advanced, because unfortunately, even in 2024, the cultural competency education, which is part and part of DI, has been canceled and attacked. A lot of medical experts who are entrusted to give care and healthcare to the entire population, regardless of ethnicity, gender, sexuality, they have blind spots. They have blind spots when it comes to racism, and there's a remarkable study that shows that so many doctors and healthcare professionals think black women are able to endure more pain, which is complete BS. They ignore black women's pleas for medication. They reject black women, which is why even Serena Williams, the greatest tennis player, almost died. I don't know if you saw that story, right? In childbirth, she almost died. She was like, "Hey, something's going wrong," right? So these are the type of unconscious biases that permeate even our medical experts, because there is no cultural competency education. And my wife, who's a doctor who works at Georgetown, said that even when it comes to training doctors, right, this wasn't there until she and her staff put this cultural competency training, part of DEI. It was initial resistance, Jake. Like 3 or 4 years ago, the old guard, none of them are racist. Like, why do we need this? We don't want to talk about this. You're attacking us. Now, 3 or 4 years later, they're like, oh, we didn't know. Thank you. And then the people of color who are the medical residents, right, the first year colleagues, they retreat into the corner. They're like, man, every time I speak up, I get attacked, so I'll just keep my mouth shut. And they said, thank you so much for introducing this, because now it introduces a perspective and education and awareness that now there's allies, a person like Jake or Waj or a white person saying out loud what we experience. It makes us more aware. It makes us more informed and allows us to be better healthcare professionals for our communities, right? How can you be open-minded and a good leader if the voices in your communities that you're supposed to represent aren't heard, if they're not being represented, if they're not in the boardroom, right? And so that's why DEI and these measures, such as cultural competency, education, books, they are allowed to expand our consciousness, expand our understanding. And when you attack it, it gets restricted. So white supremacy, we're seeing it. We're seeing it in bank loans, employment. We're seeing it in pay. We're seeing it with the rise of white Christian nationalism. We're seeing it with open normalization of neo-Nazi conspiracy theories, such as the replacement theory. We're seeing it with the normalization of the hate against Haitians. We're seeing it with the hate against women. We're seeing it in violence. The number one domestic terror threat in America is white supremacist violence. And that's why if you remove white supremacy, it's not an attack on white people, Jake. It's an attack on a system of superiority that I believe is ultimately self-destructive. And I'll end it on this. Because America, whether people like it or not, is a multiracial, multi-faith society. It is the most diverse country in the world. No one is going back. Black people aren't going to the back of the bus. Women aren't going back to the kitchen. Gay people aren't going back to the closet. People who look like me, born and raised in the country, aren't going back. So you have to make a decision. If we want to promote a white Christian male narrative where the books we read are written by white folks, where women go back to the kitchen, where, everyone who isn't white is an invader and an enemy, what will that do to this country where 35 million people are biracial? I believe, your son is, or your daughter, your child is biracial, where, you're seeing, we've moved forward. What happens to this country? The country falls apart, Jake. It's a disease. You cannot survive. White supremacy is ultimately self-destructive. It always has been. And if you don't believe me, read Jonathan Metzl's book, Dying of Whiteness, a sociologist who showed how allegiance to white supremacy has allowed people to literally vote against their own interests and literally die, Jake, in places like Tennessee. All right. So it is a self-destructive virus that makes us temporarily feel good. But at the end of the day, if we just expand ourselves a bit, it is the necessary medicine needed to heal us and help this country grow. That is what I truly believe.
Do you have 2 more minutes? Do you have to jump?
Yeah, 2 more minutes. I can do it.
So, okay. Well, I hesitate because I feel like this is, you know what? Let me end it there.
We can do it again. I talked a lot. You asked me these big questions. I don't know if it was useful or not, but
it was great. No, this is fantastic. Let me stop the recording and we'll maybe wrap up for a minute. So Wajahat Ali, thanks so much for your time, and hope to speak again soon.
No, Jake, I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me rant and ramble, but you asked big questions, and I appreciate you jumping into these waters. You seem like a good-intentioned, good dude who's trying to bridge the divides. And we need some healing. We need the bridging of divides. And I'll tell you, look, people aren't going back, folks. People aren't going back. And so I've been in that situation where I've been resistant to cultural change, right? We're all humans. But what I've realized is if you update your software, and if you lean into some tough conversations, and you lean into some tough dialogue, and you lean into some stories that might make you uncomfortable, it's like working out. At first, it sucks, but then you realize, oh, I've grown a muscle. I feel better. And I feel like our consciousness, our spirit, our hearts are very similar. You lean in at first, it's uncomfortable, but through that short-term pain is long-term growth. And so the more you can expand yourself and tolerate or wrestle with competing ideas, I think the better and healthier you will be, and you will have a better time surviving this thing called life.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Talk soon.